What we've seen is a, a White House approach of coddling the Kremlin and smacking the Ukrainians, which is really quite odd since the Ukrainians are the victim.
Putin has no incentive actually to end the war, and he has not achieved any of his objectives in Ukraine.
Let's speak now to Orsia Lutsevich, who's Deputy Director of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House. Good afternoon, Orsia.
Good to be with you.
Thank you very much for joining us. I wonder, do you back J.D. Vance's more optimistic appraisal or Marco Rubio? Who's on the money here?
Well, I think the fact that we have different assessments mean there are different camps around President Trump in the White House about how do you approach negotiations with Russia and what are you trying to achieve. And it's clear that J.D. Vance is in the camp where he thinks there should be more pressure put on Kyiv to concede to Russia in order to end the war. And Rubio sees that Ukrainians are not the ones to be pressured. He's trying to send a signal to the Kremlin, to Lavrov, that their patience will end and that Russians should actually decide whether they are ready to face the breakout of relationship. This is why I think there are two different conflicting messages we are hearing, because there is no coherence within the White House team about what they are trying to achieve.
And there's some news that's just broken in the last few minutes that Bloomberg reporting that the US is offering to ease sanctions on Russia as part of that peace proposal. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you see, here, this is the problem with that pathway to ending the war. So far, it seems to me that the strategy of giving concessions to from the United States to Russia to kind of appease and lure Putin, giving him cherries and no sticks. We've seen already this long call between Trump and Putin, and then that shameful U.S. siding at the UN around several resolutions where they voted together with Belarus and North Korea and Russia in these documents that do not actually condemn Russia's aggression in Ukraine. Now we're hearing about sanction reliefs. That means that they want to give more to Putin to end the war. But I think that is not going to work. Putin will want more and more and more until American patience will end, or America will betray both Ukraine and Europe and decide that its bilateral good relationship with Russia are more important than anything else.
Well, and Ukraine, I wonder whether Russia just has no interest in ending this war, because Ukraine agreed to that initial US proposal for 30-day ceasefire and Russia didn't. And since then, Russia's intensified its bombing of Ukraine. So they just don't want this war to end, do they?
Well, you're absolutely right. We have no evidence on the ground, nor in the statements of senior Russian officials, that they want the war to end, that they want to seek a peaceful resolution to this war that they started almost 3 years ago. So that means their own system inside Russia depends on this war. There's almost 1 million people on the battlefield. There are social payments that fuel Russian economy. There's just military defense production that holds Russian economy from collapse. So Putin has no incentive actually to end the war, and he has not achieved any of his objectives in Ukraine.
Well, let's move on to a deal that has been signed, or at least a memorandum that has been signed on the minerals that the US wants to get its hands on from Ukraine. Not a lot of details, but is it fair that Ukraine is made to use revenue from a new joint fund to cover the cost of the weapons that were provided by the Biden administration? I mean, it seems to be that in the past, countries have given aid unconditionally, but that has been rolled back under the Trump administration.
Well, to be honest, I think we are seeing an evolution of that deal over time. At the beginning, Ukrainians wanted to offer just the deal as a business opportunity to have Trump being interested in his transactional way. Then Trump decided that he will want to exhort for Ukraine the back payments that Biden offered in support to military in Ukraine. Now, in that memorandum, we actually do not see the fact that it will be a back payment, but that they will establish a recovery and reconstruction investment fund for Ukraine. It talks about future profits that American companies will be able to share with Ukrainians in exchange of investments. And what is interesting in that memorandum, there is a commitment to actually just peace in Ukraine, and also mention of Ukraine's relinquishing of its third largest nuclear arsenal, where US backed Ukraine in the Budapest memorandum to support its territorial integrity and security. So Ukrainians smartly fit into that memorandum some of these very important statements for the outcome of this war, trying to Americans on message that it should not compromise with Putin.
Well, let's hear now from an American, no other than Ambassador John Herbst. Orysia Lutsevich, thanks very much for joining us. Ambassador Herbst, former US ambassador to Ukraine, of course. Good afternoon to you. Ambassador, are you with us? You are. I can hear you distantly.
How about now?
That's much
wait.
better. That's much better. Loud and clear. Let's talk first about that. I'll come back to the minerals deal in a second. Okay. But if I could just put to you the breaking news that we had, Bloomberg reporting that the US was offering to ease sanctions on Russia as part of this peace deal, a conflict of opinion, really, between Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance about how likely it is for that agreement to be made. What are your thoughts?
Look, Trump said as he came into office, he could end this, if not within one day, that within a few months. And he laid out an approach which could have achieved a durable peace. And the Ukrainians accepted that approach about a month ago. And we all know that before they accepted that approach, when they thought that Zelensky was a little bit too rude in the Oval Office, although he was far less rude than either Trump or especially Vance, they punished Ukraine severely by pausing military aid and military intelligence sharing. Then after the Ukrainians accepted a general ceasefire, and for that matter, a ceasefire on energy installations, which Moscow promptly violated, or a ceasefire on Black Sea, the Russians refused. Now, the American position had always been that they would make the impediment to peace pay a price. But as Orysia Lutsevich just said, they seem reluctant to want to take harsh measures against the Kremlin, even though Moscow is not just the aggressor in the war, but the impediment to peace. So we've seen a rather weak approach by the Trump team towards a country which labels the United States to be its principal adversary. And that's just not good policy.
So if the US now withdraws from trying to broker this peace agreement, does that just mean really victory for Vladimir Putin and Russia?
Well, it depends. If the United States is still willing to provide weapons to Ukraine, whether with Ukraine purchasing it or the Europeans purchasing for Ukraine, that's just fine. If the United States is going to stop providing those weapons to Ukraine, they are making a gift to the Kremlin, even though the Kremlin is the obstacle to peace.
Well, there's a very
that would be a serious geopolitical mistake.
Well, there's a very big if at the start of your sentence there. I mean, what do we think is in Donald Trump's head about resuming arming Ukraine?
The short answer is we don't know. He is not. He had said after I think he won the election, before he became president, that if Russia did not agree to reasonable terms, he would arm Ukraine like it had never been armed before. But we have not heard that sort of thing from Trump for months. And what we've seen is a White House approach of coddling the Kremlin and smacking the Ukrainians, which is really quite odd, since the Ukrainians are the victims.
Yeah.
And a Russian victory in Ukraine would be a severe defeat to the United States.
And obviously, European countries and the UK are still supporting Ukraine militarily.
Right.
But can they make enough difference without the US? And does it matter to the US if there is this major war just playing on seemingly in an unending fashion in Europe?
I think that if Moscow were to actually take political control of Ukraine, which is Putin's objective, this would be a major defeat for the United States, even if the administration says that it's not America's affair. It has been our affair. We provided substantial support for Ukraine for years, albeit not enough. And Trump said he would end the war. And Trump had said Ukraine's survival as a sovereign, independent state was important to the United States. So you can't say those things and walk away without consequences for your own reputation and, for that matter, for the interests of the country you are leading. So I'm not persuaded that Trump is going to actually do that, although many people believe it. And I think that's possible, certainly.
Well, let's talk about this minerals deal, which is at least something being signed today. Not many details, but what we know about it, is it a bad deal for Ukraine and a very good deal for the US, which after all is going to get its hands on some rare earth minerals, which are imported from China currently. So that's a big headache for the administration, isn't it?
Well, I don't have all the details of the negotiations and the current state of the text. I've been told by people who know a thing or two about this that the text is far better from Ukraine's standpoint than the text that was published in, I think it was the Financial Times several weeks ago. My understanding, too, is that something's going to be signed today is not the whole deal. It's sort of part of it. And so that may be somewhat similar to what was supposed to have been signed in the Oval Office back in the end of February.
Yeah, and we know. I mean, has Volodymyr Zelensky really sort of turned things around since that showdown? Because it looked really pretty terminal at that point, didn't it?
I never thought it was terminal because, again, if Trump were to back away from Ukraine and if Trump were not to sign a legitimate, or rather, I should say, a mutually beneficial rare earths minerals agreement with Ukraine, he'd be dealing a substantial blow to the United States. We need to have reliable countries, not China or Russia, providing us rare earth minerals. And also, again, a Kremlin victory in Ukraine would be a major geopolitical defeat for the United States and would make Trump look like a really world-class loser on foreign policy.
Right.
So I think Trump understands that.
And you said that the minerals deal was rather better for Ukraine than had been originally anticipated from what we know of it. But the principle of the fact that, funds for weapons were given as a grant, not a loan, by Joe Biden. The idea that this can be sort of unpicked by future administrations, it sets a very dangerous precedent, doesn't it, for countries around the world?
It's unseemly. It suggests American unreliability. And we're seeing that again with some things relating to Trump's tariff policy.
Yeah.
So we don't want, it's not good for the United States to offer ideas or ideals like that. And hopefully this will be better understood in the new administration's leadership.
Ambassador John Herbst, thank you very much for joining us.